Hi, everybody. Yeah, we're laughing back here. This is take two, but that's okay. Tape one got a little fuzzy. So we're going to start all over again. And it's just exciting today at Living with Lyme because we are having Dr. Sean McCloy with us. And he is a physician and he has his medical degree from New York Medical College. He is practicing root medicine and is going to tell us a lot more about that. He is from Portland, Maine, where he has his own integrative health practice there. And talking about root medicine is going to be important because I really think that is going to be the future of the way we practice medicine. He has a lot of credentials, and you can look those up underneath his bio. And I want to give Dr. Sean a warm welcome. Hi, thank you for joining us on Living with Lyme.
Thank you so much, Sandy. It's a real pleasure to be here. I really appreciate it.
It's great because, sometimes I talk to people on the other side of the country, or I've even talked to people in different countries themselves. So it's really neat that we're both on the Eastern Seaboard. So we didn't have to worry about time elements and change and, those kind of things. It's great.
That's right. It's wonderful. Yeah, good to be here on the East Coast.
Yeah, and I could just kind of go up 91. I'll probably run into you at some point, right?
That's true. Yeah, well, if you could leave the state, I don't know, with the COVID practices, we locked down the state, so good luck with that.
Oh, is that true? You can't get in?
We've let people back in now, but I think Massachusetts is still on the banned list, so you'd have to quarantine for a couple of weeks.
Ooh, okay. Okay.
Sorry.
I mean, that's all right. That's all right. That's why, Zoom calls really make it feel personal, doesn't it?
Technology is helpful sometimes.
It is. It is. Are you doing telehealth at all with your practice?
Yeah, we've been fortunate enough to stay open the whole way through the crisis. We've got a lot of patients who come in for regular intravenous treatments, IV treatments, who have got cancer and other chronic diseases who really needed to continue their care. So when the crisis hit, we really looked very hard at our own policies and figured out how do we keep the center open through this and stay safe for our patients, but as well as for our staff, ourselves, our own families. And we've been very fortunate to be able to do that. I'm still doing a lot of telemedicine now and slowly getting used to speaking to somebody through a little camera. It's
I
certainly
know.
not the same as being face to face with somebody, but we do the best we can and try to help as many people we can that way.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Sometimes it's really hard, especially when people have been sick for a while. It just really wreaks havoc and they cry. And when they're crying on a computer screen, I'm like, oh no, you just can't reach them the same way.
It's hard to comfort them, that's for sure. Yeah, we muddle through. I think we're all stronger and more resilient than we give ourselves credit for. So we do our best.
I think that is probably one of the biggest things that we've learned, that there are other avenues. And it's interesting how much more we can actually gain with this, in terms of providing different types of care. Actually, at my center, I have a mental health therapist, and she's been able to offer different times. She's been able to, so people can really kind of, they can be accommodated, and the therapist can be accommodated because she doesn't always have to be in the office. So that is a benefit. Tell me more about your center and what you offer.
Sure. So I'm the medical director of Integrative Health Center of Maine. We are in Cumberland, Maine, which is just north of Portland. We've been in practice since 2005, and last year we finally came to the fruition of a multi-year dream of opening up a large integrative medical center, and that allows us to reach out to more people, to have more practitioners under the roof. We also have a really large multi-purpose room that we were so excited to use for movie screenings and lectures, and we've got a teaching kitchen there, yoga classes, and then wham, the crisis hit. So when the world opens up again, we'll be here waiting for our community. One of our missions and our goals is to create what I call a mini blue zone around us. So these blue zones around the world are places where people tend to live a long, healthy, happy life. And researchers have looked at various reasons why that is, but typically as a community, people have certain healthy habits that they all kind of follow. And we're hoping to take some of those lessons and teach the community around us and really improve the health and welfare and public health of those of our neighbors around us. So we're trying to create a mini blue zone here in Cumberland, Maine as well.
Yeah, and you know what it is? It's a trickle down effect. If you can get people to really buy in to a whole separate approach than a band-aid approach, like, you have this, here's a pill for that, and oh, you had side effects of that one, let me give you this on top of that. If people can buy into lifestyle medicine and create, be respectful for your body, because people are just, they're caught up in this fast rat race, and they got to eat fast, and they don't pay attention to what they're eating or how they're eating. And it really is. I don't know about your area up there, but down here in Massachusetts, uh, it's a learning experience. And the idea to explain to people the concept of gluten, and well, I don't have celiac. Well, you don't have to have celiac disease, the genetic portion, etc., to have some impact from gluten in your diet. And boy, I just can't do that. I can't do it. So I almost want to say, let me refund your money. Because if you can't do this, people really need to. So if you get 2 or 3 people that are happy, it's like, oh my God, I got this improvement. Uh, and then they tell someone, and that person tells someone, well, maybe we can bring about that change. But as we talked before we started recording here, I'm having awful trouble with primary cares. They really, I don't know why they feel so intimidated by someone who's practicing a different style, functional medicine, root medicine, because it really truly can help them in the long run, don't you think?
Absolutely, I do. And I guess I see the little silver linings here and there. So if you look at sort of the trajectory of how medical care has been going, we're making inroads, I think, in terms of proving that this style of medical care, A, it works, right? We know it works. It's very effective for addressing these root causes of chronic disease. And B, it really is very cost effective too. And that's probably, unfortunately, ultimately the argument that we'll have to make to get this style of medicine into the mainstream, because ultimately you're saving the insurance companies, the national debt, a lot of money if you can get a person to have healthier habits and really heal themselves from the inside out over time. They're not going to need all these pharmaceuticals. They're not going to need all the hospitalizations and all of the procedures and surgeries, and they live a longer, happier, healthier life in the end, and that saves a lot of money over the long run. So I take great pleasure from seeing the lesson that Dr. Mark Hyman from the Institute of Functional Medicine has done with the Cleveland Clinic. So the Cleveland Clinic is this very, kind of institutionalized, conservative, conventional center, and Dr. Hyman and others convinced them to open up a whole wing for functional medicine, and as a kind of a trial to see how it went. And very quickly into that trial, they had to double the size of the space and the staff and the practitioners because it was doing so well. And so many patients were seeking that kind of care. And bottom line wise, I think the hospital administrator saw, gee, this really is pretty cost effective, and this is a good style of medicine to practice. So I see little victories here and there. And, as you well know, I think medical practitioners are conservative beasts by nature, and the practice of medicine, the style of medicine is very slow to change. So we're slowly getting some progress forward.
I was discussing with a medical practitioner something very simple, and it was it wasn't a difficult idea to kind of wrap your head around. And the answer I got was, well, you know what, we practice with scientific evidence. And I'm like, there's scientific backing on stomach pH, or enzymes or whatever. It's like I said, it's kind of crazy. 2 things I was thinking about was, one, the very high statistic, and I don't have the number in front of me, of how many people die of prescription complications in the United States every year. And that's even appropriately, managed. These are medications that are supposed to be used and effective for a certain kind of problem or diagnoses. But medications are really they can be dangerous. Now, don't get me wrong, they're important. You have to use them in certain situations. You can't say there's never a place for a medication. Can't do that. But all in all, they can be dangerous. And then again, what do you do with the medication? You know, it's backed by some pharmaceutical research, by the pharmaceutical company, and then you're going to find the path of money. You know, you can't, like, women come and they want, say, bioidentical hormones. You know, they really want something. They realize that, you know, their Premarin was from pregnant horses' urine and the process and others that are synthetic, and they really want something more. But then they ask for the research. Well, the problem is compounding pharmacies have their raw material to make and prep these preparations, and because it's not backed by, you know, a big pharma, we don't have, we can take from the information of other, you know, pharmaceutical based hormone products, but we can't say exactly that this compounded substance, it will work exactly the same. But we do know that it's got to be more, it's got to be safer. So we really get stuck sometimes when we're trying to do the best for our patients. And it's a disservice. It truly is a disservice.
It's a source of constant frustration. You know, being myself an evidence-based practitioner, I would love to see, you know, 100,000 patient randomized placebo-controlled double-blinded crossover trial on vitamin C. But you can't patent vitamin C. You can't make a big profit off of vitamin C, and so those research dollars really just are not there to do that kind of a trial. And it would be great if we could do that. I think the NIH does some trials and funds some of those things, and they're trying to really practice more evidence-based medicine and publish those types of trials. So once again, we're slowly seeing the emergence of some of this data, but it's, you know, we're never going to compete with the pharmaceutical industry, that's for sure. And so it's frustrating to me as well. We do the best we can, and like I said, we start with what makes sense scientifically, and if there are some animal trials or some small human clinical trials, that's wonderful, and we'd always love to see more research and more evidence. Absolutely.
Right, right. You know, if it works for the majority of people, you know, I mean, it is trial and error. It's the same thing with any medication as well. Not everyone is going to respond to exactly the same thing. It would be lovely, you know, we could write an algorithm and, you know, but we know that. And when we come to, let's talk more about what is root cause medicine, because we know that everybody's root may be very different. You know, we kind of, you know, have a lot of different issues, symptoms or, you know, problems, etc. But their root cause is different. So tell me how you, if someone said, hey, Dr. McCloy, how would you define root cause medicine? What would be your elevator pitch?
Sure. So root cause medicine is looking literally at what is the cause of this disease that's going on. I think that in traditional allopathic conventional medicine, it's kind of a top-down approach where you start with the symptoms that the patient comes in complaining of, and you take those symptoms and try to put them into a box of this is the diagnosis that lists all these symptoms, and then you choose a pharmaceutical agent that kind of squashes those symptoms and tries to suppress those symptoms. But the actual problem may still be going on in the background. So let's just take high blood pressure. How many Americans have high blood pressure? And so there are a lot of medications, pharmaceutical medications we have that will address one little part of high blood pressure, but really the root cause, there are many root causes, but you look at the health of the blood vessels themselves and what has caused damage in those blood vessels. So in root cause medicine, we're looking at not only physical health, but mental health, spiritual health, emotional health, that mind-body medicine. We're looking at community health. What are the circles around you in terms of your family and the larger community? We're looking at the interplay of genetics, nutrition, metabolism, energy production, these kind of really basic molecule building block parts of our health and how they all interact with each other that lead downstream to the actual symptom. So I find myself going back to some of the textbooks that I studied in my first year of medical school, like biochemistry and genetics, that didn't seem like they were really relevant at the time that I was reading this stuff. And it's all right there in those very basic textbooks that a lot of medical doctors have forgotten about. So it's back to the basics, but such a powerful style of medicine to actually fix the problem and not just cover symptoms up with drugs.
How would you define stress when it comes to illness?
Stress plays a huge pervasive role in many chronic diseases, and it's whether it's physical stress or emotional stress, psychological stress. All of those really affect our immune system and how we read our DNA and how we produce energy in the mitochondrial little energy factories in our cells. How our gut works, how we absorb nutrition, how we absorb those signals from our food. Stress affects everything in our body. It affects our brain health, our short and long-term brain health. So dementia prevention, as well as the brain fog that I'm feeling today, all of this stuff is related to stress, certainly. I talk about it every day in my practice.
Yeah, it's hard because people say, well, I ruminate. I, I go to bed at night and I'm thinking and thinking and I can't shut it off. And I'm like, really? What do you do before you go to bed? Oh, I watch the news. Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we have a link here. This is good. I'm glad you told me that.
How
So,
many of us are scrolling through our news feed screens on our cell phone right up until the moment we close our eyes for sleep? You know, our brain needs time to shut down and wind down and let go of all that stuff.
yeah, because, people say that, well, actually, some functional practitioners will say that if you are eating and you're watching the news, especially, I mean, really, the news is just all bad stuff. There really isn't too much good stuff. That you actually consume the food and it becomes this terrible stress link. Uh, it's crazy. Our bodies are so much more intricate than we can read in any type of physiology book. And the biochemistry is, it's very impactful because certain things like, vitamin C can really help the immune system, the integrity of your blood vessels. Magnesium is critical and it's probably one of the most depleted minerals in the body. And some of the simple things that people just don't realize. It was funny because my husband brought home his lab slip from the primary care doctor who didn't want to take any of my business cards. So whatever. Anyways, and so he says, what? Because I wanted his magnesium and his zinc level checked. And well, why does she want that? And he goes, I don't know. I'm the finance guy. So he plays dummy and he scoffed about it. And, zinc is real critical for immunity. It's real important for testosterone. And, it's easy to get a little bit more zinc in your diet, but right.
I think something patients to keep in mind is that most medical doctors, like myself, have almost zero nutritional training. So in 4 years of medical school, I had maybe a 45-minute course on nutrition, and most of that course was how to order IV micronutrient drops for a patient in a coma. That was my nutritional training that I got in medical school. And patients don't realize how little their doctors know about nutrition. I really had to seek my own knowledge outside of my traditional medical school training and get more and more information from other sources on that. So yeah, I certainly would not trust most MDs when it comes to a good functional nutritional assessment.
It's interesting. I had a guest from UMass Medical School who is a dietitian, and she actually teaches nutrition to, I think they might even be in their second year medical school. So she does a whole, semester on it. I was like, this is awesome. That's just what we need. I mean, truly, food is medicine, right? Don't you think that?
Absolutely. Yeah, you talked before about how stress impacts the food that we eat. I remember going to a lecture from Jeffrey Bland, who's a real functional medicine guru, and he was talking about how there's good quality data on how our body transforms the food that goes into our mouth into the signals that actually talk to our bodies. So you could make a wonderful green smoothie with all kinds of healthy proteins and vegetables and all kinds of great stuff. But if you're drinking that smoothie while you're driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour, that's a stressful situation for your body. You actually transform that really good food into stress hormones in your body that creates more inflammation and more damage and more stress, as opposed to sitting and relaxing and enjoying that food in front of you. So that same healthy apple can turn into good stuff or bad stuff depending on the situation that you eat it in.
Right. So basically you feed the fire
Yes.
wherever the fire is, right? So in right. So if you can squelch the fire, then you're going to feed it across the board. But if your adrenals are absolutely throwing out, cortisol and whatnot, you're going to give the fuel over to that portion of your body.
Precisely so.
Precisely so. Evidently, we love talking that way. So, how did you make the transformation? I mean, you're an MD and you went to medical school, and where did you say this might not be all that it can be?
Most of my life I wanted to be a neurosurgeon. I'm fascinated by the brain. I still am. I kind of love that romance of being in the operating room, and I like working with my hands. And I really wanted to have a career in neurosurgery, believe it or not, until I learned what the life of most neurosurgeons is like, and the quality of their lives and their job satisfaction, their burnout rate, the fact that most of the patients really don't get a lot better. You're dealing with brain cancer and severed spinal cords and really pretty awful stuff. And as I entered medical school, I realized that really what appealed to me about being a physician is the story of the patient, is learning about their lives, really helping them truly to achieve health and and to get them to feel better and to live a better life. And I did a complete 180-degree turn and decided to go into family medicine. Because I like working with kids, I like working with adults, and I really realized that I wanted to make an impact throughout people's whole lives, throughout their whole lifespans. So that's how I kind of came into medical school. Still very skeptical of alternative medicine and all that kind of quackery stuff, in my third year of medical school, that's when you traditionally begin to work in the hospital wards and begin to work with real human being patients. And I realized that although traditional allopathic, conventional, pharmaceutical-based medicine, very powerful. It definitely has a role in acute medical care, and drugs certainly have a big impact on the body, and there's absolutely a role for that style of medicine. As a family doctor, drugs don't really make people healthy. And if I wanted to try to spend most of my career trying to get people to be healthier, I needed more tools for my toolbox. So I was talking to a friend of mine from college who was going through naturopathic medical school at about the same time, and I asked her, what are you guys learning about these days? Because they'd taken all the same basic anatomy and pathophysiology courses that I was, but now she's learning about nutrition. She's learning about mind-body medicine and acupuncture and herbal medicine, et cetera. And I said, oh, but there's no evidence for any of that. Come on. And so she began to
See?
send me some
See?
articles. Exactly. This is the mantra that we're taught in medical school. So she sent me some good evidence-based articles, and I kind of opened my mind up a little bit. I actually started a holistic medicine student interest group in medical school, and I put on a conference as my fourth year of medical school, and we had a holistic medicine conference that we did, and I brought a bunch of speakers in and really kind of was interested to learn more, basically. So I would describe myself as an open-minded skeptic, right? And when I started my residency, I came to Maine Medical Center in Portland, Maine to do my family medicine residency, because at that time it was one of two sites in the nation that had integrative medicine training wrapped up within the regular family medicine training. And I wanted to just learn, right? And so I came here and it really piqued my interest. I did all of my electives in various integrative medicine specialties and got more and more excited about doing that style of medicine when I graduated. And so in 2005, when I got out of residency, I started up a medical practice with a naturopath called Maine Integrative Wellness, and then took over the practice in 2011, I think. Changed the name to Integrative Health Center of Maine, and we've grown and grown and grown since then. And now we've got this integrative medical center. So it's been a very interesting arc from brain surgeon to medical director of an integrative medical health center.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's a path, and sometimes you start off in one direction, but you can get a detour, or you can see something that changes. My whole situation, and just becoming a nurse, because you have to become a nurse and get a bachelor's degree before you can go on to become a nurse practitioner. I was told, I went to a Catholic high school, and I was supposed to meet one of the career counselors, and I looked in the room and no one was there. So I sat in the chair, and out comes a nun. I can't tell you who she was. I don't even know if I even knew her name back then. And she says, okay, who are you? What what do you want to do? And I go, oh, I mean, neither my parents finished high school. And so I said, well, I think I'll go to a community college and I'll be a surgical tech, because I knew I loved science and all that. And so she looked at all my scores. She looked at, whatever curriculum and things. She goes, oh, no. I go, no. She goes, no, you're going to be a nurse. Here you go. Here's the schools you're going to apply to, and this is what you're going to do. And yes, that's what you're going to do. And no one had ever told me this is what you're going to do. So I was like, okay. So I went home. I told my parents, I'm going to school. I'm going to be a nurse. And they were like, really? And I'm like, yep, that's what I'm doing. Never looked back. Never, ever, ever looked back. And to this day, no one else ever had a meeting, and this is 40 years later, when we talk about it, even long ago, no one had a meeting with this nun. Everybody had Mr. So-and-so, the career counselor. So divine intervention, something happened that day.
The universe provides, and you were wise enough to listen.
Yeah. Hey, someone's going to take interest and tell me what to do. I mean, some people have told me other things to do, and I've neglected that fact, but whatever. What are you going to do? So, you know what? I've studied with the Institute of Functional Medicine, and I've also studied with the School of Applied Functional Medicine. I'm going to tell you what they insist on, and I bet you're going to say the same thing. The common denominator with most chronic issues is the gut. Do you feel the same way?
Hippocrates said it, heal the gut first.
He did?
He said all disease and all health starts in the gut.
Hippocrates, wow. I'm going to write that one down.
Yeah, we're not the first ones to come up with that, but I absolutely agree. I almost always start by assessing GI function in my chronically ill patients, and there's almost always some gut pathology going on there, and it really is true. I mean, the more we learn about the gut, the more we realize we don't know much about the gut. We were joking before around that evidence-based medicine, and I chuckle now to see the conventional gastroenterology journals talking about bacteria and probiotics and how they may actually be helpful for people and what's going on there.
Amazing.
I know, it's incredible. So they're, conventional medicine slowly catching up with what we knew 2,000 years ago in the time of Hippocrates.
I know. And I have to say that that's an area that they need more functional approaches to, because they get stuck. They hit a wall, and I've had a lot of people that have small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, they come in gassy and bloaty and miserable and diarrhea or constipation or both or whatever. And they've been doing this roundabout kind of treatment and getting nowhere for years. And so, again, a lot of people who are used to an allopathic approach, they'll ask, give me something right now to make this go away. I don't have anything right now. It took a while to get here. So now we've got to work at it and kind of reverse it. And so that mindset sometimes leaks into the people who reach out to us, because they know we're a different type of approach. Is that happening to you too?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I see patients every day who've worked with a number of different practitioners and never got the answers they needed. So, you and I are these kind of medical mystery solvers. And I usually start by looking at the gut. And, if you think about it, if your GI system isn't working well, you could take all the supplements in the world and eat the healthiest diet, but none of that good stuff is going to get into your body and do its healing juice. And you also can't get rid of the toxins. So if the good stuff can't get in and the bad stuff can't go out, you're going to spin your wheels until you address that root cause.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting. Do you like to do stool analyses, or do you like to do organic acids? How do you like to assess the gut?
Depends on the patient. So I'll certainly look at SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. That's a breath test typically. We'll do stool analyses, and that looks at kind of really the whole tube, you could say. So anything from the stomach on down. Certainly organic acid tests are very helpful for looking at dysbiosis, yeast overgrowth. There are biomarkers consistent with malabsorption syndrome on some of those organic acid tests. And it also gives you a good sense of the downstream effects of that gut pathology in terms of nutritional deficiencies, metabolic dysfunctions. You can look at the whole Krebs cycle of how you turn your food into energy. And if something is falling off the rails along that Krebs cycle, you've got to address that too. But really, to heal any of that, you've got to heal the gut first.
Right, right, right. Yeah. And it's interesting because there's a huge percentage of people that are on proton pump inhibitors, Prilosec, omeprazole, and the like. And then you get them and they're petrified to come off of. Yeah,
Perfect example of both the power and the limitation of that allopathic medicine. So those PPIs and the H2 blockers, boy, do they work. They really shut down your acid production very effectively. And, for some situations, for short-term use, they might be appropriate for certain patients. But now we're seeing all these long-term health consequences of how stomach acid might actually be something that we need. And when you're shutting down that part of the stomach, now you can't really absorb iron anymore, or B12. And so you find, downstream nutritional deficiencies. Also, that acid-base balance helps with the balance of good, healthy bacteria downstream too. So we're seeing all these issues arise now that PPIs are over the counter. When they first came on the market, they had this FDA black box warning in the little insert for physicians saying, do not prescribe for any more than 1 month in a row because of all these bad things that can happen. And we just kind of forgot about that. I don't know. And now anybody can buy them willy-nilly over the counter. So it's, like I said before, money talks, unfortunately. And I hate to say that. It kind of sounds a little cynical, but we see evidence of that over and over again.
Yeah, yeah. And it's hard because, people equate Tylenol and non-steroidal like Advil or Aleve or Motrin as safe because you can get it over the counter.
Sure, absolutely. Lots of toxins there on those shelves.
I know. It's interesting, but you know what? Here's a really cool thing. You probably already know that, but I know this thing. But when someone goes into the emergency room and has taken an overdose of acetaminophen or Tylenol, they give them milk
NAC,
thistle.
typically, yeah, right, yeah. Milk thistle, which has NAC, N-acetylcysteine, which turns into glutathione, which is a powerful antioxidant. It protects the liver. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because they're like, herbs. And then here you go, you got something right back to nature. I mean, if you look hard enough in your soil and in the mountains and whatever, there's our medicine that's right there. And interesting, there has been up the eastern seaboard, it's Japanese knotweed, I believe, just growing wild, right? And if you think about it, Lyme disease has spread up that eastern seaboard. Oh, you got that smile going. I see you over there. You're laughing. And it's true. Isn't that like an interesting fact that that's one of the treatments of Lyme disease is Japanese knotweed. And here it is, growing right along with the ticks right up the side of the coast. Do you guys, I'm sure you see a lot of Lyme disease.
Oh, all the time. Yeah. Maine is, I think, the #1 state really per capita for Lyme right now. We're endemic here.
Yeah, it's crazy. And, when you think about it, most people they just don't know. And I get like on my high horse about prolonged antibiotic use. I'm like, oh my god, people come to me after they've been on antibiotics for like 2-3 years, and I'm thinking to myself, oh my god, no wonder you have all of this gut disturbance. No wonder. And at that point, I like to use, it's okay, you can use a short term kind of antibiotic course. But I really love getting people onto, herbal approaches, and then we can use those longer. And those herbs are smaller molecules. They can get into places. I just mentioned to somebody the other day, she says, oh, I'm perfect. I'm fine. I got 10 days of doxycycline. And I'm like, 10 days, okay. Um, Gosh, first of all, doxycycline doesn't kill Lyme disease. It kind of stops it from moving around so the body can do it. You're kidding me. I'm like, well, no, it's called bacteriostatic. It's not bactericidal. And they're like, oh, well, my doctor said I'd be fine. I don't need any more. And see, this is the other thing. We, like butt heads, especially. I don't know if you have any personal experience with Lyme disease, but man, I was like so misdiagnosed for so long. And, I'm one of those statistics. And yeah, when you live it, and now you're seeing it, and you're trying so desperately not to have somebody have that same path that you went down. And they're convinced by their MDs that the reference lab down the street, those labs are perfect, and it's hard. They're not perfect labs. Nothing's perfect, right? But in terms of sensitivity and specificity, we kind of are lacking in that, in just the neighborhood hospital labs. So what do you see? How do you handle it, and what kind of treatment options do you like to use?
For Lyme disease?
Yeah.
How long is your podcast, Cindy?
Okay, let's go. Let me get a sip of something. And
Yeah. Well, it's funny you mentioned about the kind of the conventional medical community, because I know that there's a saying in the chronic Lyme world of you don't get it until you get it. And I have met a lot of healthcare practitioners who were on the more conservative side of the argument, and felt like you were saying that the standard of care was fine, the local labs are fine, and maybe one dose of doxy is all that you really need, and there's no such thing as this chronic illness until they themselves got ill, or maybe had a family member who got ill, and then they really saw the shortcomings of that very conservative approach. So I meet those doctors all the time at the ILADS conventions now, and they need to learn more about treating this chronic complex illness. So yeah, we have a lot of tick-borne disease here in Maine, and I have a variety of approaches that I use in my practice, ranging from conventional antibiotic therapy to a lot of different evidence-based alternative and integrative therapies. I follow the work of Dr. Richard Horowitz very closely, and I really like his kind of stepwise, very logical, very evidence-based approach. So like most MDs and other practitioners, I really try to be a responsible steward when it comes to antibiotic use. And I think that they definitely play a role in tick-borne disease, but you want to use it for the shortest possible course that individual patient needs the antibiotics for. And some patients, maybe that is going to be months or even years sometimes. One thing that is emerging now in the tick-borne disease literature is that it may be more a case of not an active acute infection, but something has gone awry in the immune system mechanism, that the ability of the immune system to recognize there's an infection versus there's a chronic problem here, and perhaps the immune system begins to attack our own body's cells. There seems to be this emergence of inflammation dysregulation as well. So we've got this concept of Th1 and Th2 helper cells. One turns on your immune system, or your inflammation system, one turns it off, and that seesaw balance gets out of whack, and you're way too inflamed for no reason, and that goes on for years and years. So you know, in terms of antibiotics alone, we know from our studies, you can't just expect to throw antibiotics at a chronic tick-borne disease patient and expect them to get better. You have to treat them holistically and integratively and look at all these other downstream effects of what that initial infection caused. So yes, you put out the fire, you reduce the inflammation. You've got to look at hormone balances. You've got to look at gut health, of course. You look at neurological health, the blood-brain barrier. You look at neurotransmitter imbalances that leads to psychological disease, that leads to the memory loss and the brain fog, maybe even Alzheimer's disease. You look at tissue inflammation, certainly, even blood sugar regulation, the adrenal cyst you mentioned before. So that's why they're calling Lyme the new great mimicker, because it mimics all these other diseases that are out there, and you've got to put all those pieces of the puzzle together to successfully treat this very chronically ill individual. And it's not a one-size-fits-all approach either. So you kind of really know what you're doing with it, and work with a Lyme literate practitioner.
Right. And you know what? And I'm sure you see the same. Not only is it a possibility of a tick-borne illness, but there's other environmental factors. And one of the things that I found the best to do is ask people where they live, where they work, and what they do. And I can't believe the amount of people that have, you know, mycotoxins. And I have this wonderful gentleman right now. I call him my best patient ever. He does everything, you know, he's just such a kind-hearted man. And when I asked him what he did, he said, I just retired. And I'm like, oh, congratulations. That's wonderful. What did you do? HVAC, electrician, plumber.
Oh no.
Yow. And so I sent off a hair analysis for metals, and oh man. So, you
I
know,
was listening to Dr. Horowitz lecture one time on chronic Lyme, and he said, you know, if I've treated the infection, I'm pretty sure the Lyme itself is gone, and my patient still has lingering brain fog issues, I think of two things, mold and metals. And so you just listed both of those, the mycotoxins and the heavy metal assessment, and you've got to get all that junk out of the body.
yeah, yeah. Mold is tough. Mold is tough because the treatment sometimes can make people really not feel well. So, you know, I have people that like fall off, and, you know, because they didn't follow up and they didn't give me a chance to like really reduce the treatment for a little bit. Let's not go too fast. And that makes it difficult, you know, because you know what's wrong and you want to help them and you want to eliminate. The person that I had more recently, she had been sick for a long time, and it was a primary care, actually, sent her to me. No one asked her what she did. She did mold remediation. Come on. But, you know, truth be told, they don't know what to do with that. They don't know what to do with that.
It's pretty complicated. It's certainly not something that your average clinician is going to get training in. You've got to seek out this training at specialized conferences, do your reading, and it's not easy. And you know, and you also can't practice that style of medicine in your typical 15-minute office visit setting either. So there's a real limitation for your average doctor to even A, learn about it, and B, actually practice that in a kind of a group practice setting. Insurance companies don't really pay doctors to talk to their patients. They pay doctors to see 30 or 40 patients a day. And so, you know, you're lacking the basic education and you're lacking the time that is needed to really practice functional medicine and integrative medicine correctly. So not a big mystery on why, you know, the standard conventional medical community is not really good at treating this kind of illness.
Right. Takes too long. Dr. Lauren Tessier, she's up in Maine. I don't know if you're familiar with her. All she treats is mold.
I saw that you did a podcast with her a little while back, so I want to go back and listen to that.
Fun. We decided, she just texted me like over the weekend, showed me a picture of her little guy. And we say this all the time, the two of us, if we ever got together, we could get into big trouble.
Well, Maine has a lot of mold problems. We've got a very old housing stock here, a lot of these kind of old farmhouses with these crumbling, you know, stone foundations that the water gets right in. And I see a lot of mycotoxicity here in my practice as well.
You do. You do. You've got a lot of intricate problems that you deal with on a regular basis.
It's a, it's a very challenging patient panel, I would say. It's a intellectually very interesting patient panel, and it kind of constantly keeps me on my toes, and I've got to keep learning all the time, so it keeps it fresh.
Um, you know, when you get someone that you think you're right on with, and you go the course, and you're 3 4 months into it, and they're not better, what does that say to you? What is your process at that point?
I guess I've been doing this medicine long enough to realize that I don't know all the answers, and I'm not right all the time. I think that the three hardest words for a doctor to say is "I don't know,"
Yeah.
but I keep digging. I really consider myself a detective, kind of a clinician, and so one of the reasons why I really appreciate this functional medicine approach is it's so comprehensive, and there's so many tools in the toolbox to explore that very rarely am I completely stumped. I've not been 100% successful with every patient that's walked through my door, but I can usually get people feeling better, if not all the way better. So I think you kind of go back to the basics, go back to the drawing board, and say, okay, have I really considered looking at toxins or at gut health, or maybe some tick-borne disease going on here that I haven't addressed, or blood sugar dysregulation, hormones. It's there. The answer is usually there somewhere. And I never give up. It's one of the most rewarding parts of my job is working with that patient who has seen 20 or 30 other clinicians, gone around the country, around the world sometimes, and you finally get that one little nugget of information, or you kind of put some pieces together that make sense biologically, and you begin to work on that. And our human bodies are very wise. They want to be well. They want to get better, as long as you put in the good stuff and take out the bad stuff. It's really what it comes down to. So once you can kind of get the ball rolling in the right direction, one of my favorite quotes from medical school is Dr. Osler back in the 1800s said, "The role of the physician is to entertain the patient while they heal themselves." And I try to remember that sometimes when I just kind of stand back and let somebody get better on their own and stay out of the way.
Right, right. If you had to, I won't give you a number, but if I ask you, what do you think are the biggest contributors to poor health? What would you say they are?
Boy, you mentioned stress, certainly that. I think nutrition, lack of exercise, lack of sleep. So there's a Dr. Robert Rakowski, who's a chiropractor out of Texas, who talks about the Magnificent Seven. And there's that old Western movie, The Magnificent Seven. So he says there are seven things that you have to do every single day of your life if you want to feel well and be well and live to be 100 and feel good for most of those times. Very simple, but very hard to do. So every single day, you've got to eat right, drink right, sleep right, think right, talk right, move right, and poop right. Every single set. And so I go back to those basics sometimes, and I think those are really the seven big contributors to a lot of our disease and illness too.
Right, right. The pooping. And it's so funny because maybe you agree with this. When I was learning, GI stuff back, it was like, well, if someone poops like, 2 3 or every other day or whatever, well, that's okay. That's just what they need. Little did I know, like, this whole role of detoxification is a lot more than, just a little sweat going on there. You really got to poop. And people are like, well, I've been this way my whole life. And then underneath my breath, I'm like, well, that's why you're the way you are now.
I've learned in doing we call it the review of systems, kind of asking about everything head to toe and asking about their bowel habits. And say, instead of just saying, are you constipated? Because they'll say, no, I'm fine. I say, how many bowel movements a day do you have? And sometimes they say, oh, I go twice a week. I'm okay. And you got to have 2 to 3 regular, well-formed soft bowel movements a day, I think, to have good elimination. So very few of us have that in our lives unless we're eating right, drinking right, sleeping right, thinking right, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, yeah. What do you find the hardest to help people change?
I think I have certainly been challenged over the years by people who have been sick for long enough where they identify themselves as a sick person. And when we begin to make some progress and some headway and they begin to feel a little better, that's scary for them. They are now a new human being, a new person, and this is not what their comfort zone is anymore. And all of a sudden, they stop coming in for their appointments,
Yeah.
and then they come back maybe a year or two later, and they're back with their old symptoms and they're sick. And I ask, "What have you been doing?" And they fell off the wagon. They stopped following the guidelines and the recommendations.
Yep.
And there's certainly a psychological component to that, absolutely, that I don't know if it's a personality disorder or what, or maybe the nature of the illness is causing so much inflammation in their brain that they just get stuck in that identification as a sick individual. And I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't know how to, really kind of dig down into that, but it's an interesting phenomenon that I've observed a few times over the years. I don't have a magic pill for that. It's a difficult conversation to have with somebody, but I just kind of I give them my observations and I kind of have them do some reflective thinking and maybe some motivational interviewing. So those are very challenging people who are just really, really entrenched and stuck and identify as their disease.
Yeah, it's funny because I've seen people just kind of, that's all they talk about. And and this is not as a practitioner, but when I was doing a podcast with Dr. Neil Nathan, who wrote the book Toxic, he talked about that. And he talked about getting people to a certain level. And then all of a sudden, they're capable of moving forward, like taking on a job and they start backpedaling. And I guess it is a bit of fear. And maybe it's the fact that either they don't feel well supported, or they've been allowed, or to be this way for so long. Yeah, I think there's a lot to do with personality. Some people just curl up and die, and other people really fight the fight. But again, it's the more support you have in your home, in your community, I think that's what helps. And thinking of that, I want to go back quickly to Dr. Hyman, the whole thing at the Cleveland Clinic. They were one of the first ones to use an approach with group kind of treatments, so that they could offer something less expensive than the one-on-one, yet provide that kind of care. And what they found was that the camaraderie and the support of these individuals in this group helped formulate a healing circle, let's call it, right? A healing circle. And they did super, super, super well. And I think there's room for that. Like, once I can have more people into our community space, then it may be able to do. I guess it gets a little touchy, a little iffy when it comes to, protected health information. But, I think some people are just so willing to share. They've really need that support that might actually work out pretty well in everybody's favor.
I do a lot of IV therapy here, as I mentioned earlier, and we've got a lot of cancer patients that come in for various treatments. And there is a certain magic that happens in that IV room where people sit around and they just spontaneously have conversations, and inevitably tears will happen, laughter will happen, they'll give each other useful advice, they share resources, and there's so much healing that happens when we have that human connection. That is just, it's priceless, and you can't, there's no substitute for it. So I love the group model of care. It makes a lot of sense, especially in a setting like Cleveland Clinic. You take something pretty basic like metabolic syndrome, or kind of pre-diabetes. We know very well what the problems are metabolically with that, and the treatment is usually pretty cut and dry as well. But it's just a matter of having to actually figure out how to do it. How do you eat healthier and get your body moving and exercise a little bit? And how do you make that happen in real life when we've got stress and jobs and kids and not enough time in the day to do any of that stuff? So I often see a lot of problem solving and group support and those kinds of models, and people inevitably have solutions.
Yeah, yeah. I think metabolic syndrome is the new pandemic within the pandemic, right? And Yeah, it's hard. That's a hard one because if you're seeing people once a month or something and you're like, okay, we're going to try this, okay? Like just something simple. We're going to try, you got to try to walk 20 minutes a day or, whatever. It is simple yet difficult because of habits. People have, they fall back into old habits and, I find that I don't even know. Some people come with so many problems and almost everybody has a high fasting insulin or an insulin that's okay, but their blood sugar's high and it's like, oh Lord. And especially, I don't know about men, I suppose it's men too, but when I think of women and this, this added estrogen within this fat and how that is leading to more, it's like a vicious cycle. And
Not fair.
yeah, you got to break it. You got to break it. Yeah. And, I think people live within a family and they all are, it's hard because especially with a mom or dad that are really not doing the best they can, they're already starting bad habits with their kids. And it's, people have to buy in, they have to want this. And that's where sometimes the problem occurs. People don't realize until there is a catastrophe, where someone ends up in the hospital with, chest pain or whatnot, or these people who are dying with COVID. And I can't help, I mean, they're not everybody, don't get me wrong. And I can't, say this across the board, but you look at the pictures of these people and they're heavier, and I worry that it's, underlying inflammation, because the inflammation that's going on from elevated blood sugar, it's happening at the vascular level. It's not necessarily something that you feel. I mean, yeah, you might be dragging that big old body around, and taking some deep breaths, but you don't necessarily feel that horrible inflammation that's going on. So is that a big part of your practice too, really working
Oh,
on
absolutely.
that?
Yeah. Inflammation is almost always, at one of those root causes of illness. And so, they say that obesity is contagious. And I think and the research is bearing that out in terms of social contagion. So if you've got a parent teaching a child certain habits, or friends who hang out with other friends who might have bad habits, and everybody in that circle now has the same habits, whether they're good or bad, right? We teach each other how to live. And now we're seeing, again, back to the gut. So we're discovering these gut microbiome issues that may lead to obesity and metabolic syndrome. And people in the same family share the same bugs, the same bacteria, both healthy or unhealthy in their guts. So obesity really literally can be contagious. If you look at fecal transplant studies where you take a stool sample from a healthy, skinny, thin individual and put it into an obese individual, this is both mice and I think now some human studies as well, that obese individual will begin to shift their metabolic function and begin to lose fat weight and ramp up their metabolism if they maintain a healthy lifestyle. If they keep doing their old habits, they slip right back into that old metabolic way and regain the weight again too. So we can always make a change. There's always hope of getting better, and you just have to figure out how to do it.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to portray that as a big time option, because I bet you people will be like, sign me up.
Do not try this at home, please.
Well, this has been so good. Such a learning experience. I hope everybody who's been listening really got a little bit. I mean, even, I look at things when I'm watching a webinar or whatnot, and my only goal is to take one tidbit, because there's so much information, and if we can learn one new thing, and if I could, for my people, just inspire them enough. Some people will say, that they're not really willing. And then I have to ask them, so you're not willing to give up X, Y, or Z. So why, how can I help you if you won't do your part? And, it was funny because I think it's Dr. Tom Moorcroft said in a podcast once, he said, I can't work harder than you. I'm going to give you a toolbox. we're going to work about this toolbox, gaining more information. And at the end, I'm going to lock it and hand you the key. And that toolbox is going to be for you to use. That's a great analogy. It's a great visualization. But I guess sometimes people aren't ready until they're ready. And you can only lead a horse to water, right? Can't make them drink.
You know, I find myself talking to my patients a lot these days around silver linings with this COVID crisis and people being, stuck at home, quarantining, self-isolating. It can be, and it is, a really stressful time for all of us. But I often find myself viewing the positive in that. And I think that a lot of us are learning that life is pretty simple and that our needs are pretty simple. And it can be a very powerful time to really work on ourselves. So as we lose all the distractions of going out and buying all the stuff you don't need and doing all the things you don't need to do, you're just at home taking care of the absolute essentials. Good time to work on some of those things. And we realize how valuable it is to be with ourselves and to be with our families, and the power of those connections can be a real healing opportunity. So I remind my patients that all the time, and I'm seeing that in my own family, on my own health too, that this is a very interesting and unique time for the world, that we don't need all the stuff and all the extra fluff out there. So find the positive in where you are.
That's awesome. And I think that's a great suggestion for everybody, because we always need to be reminded. Sometimes we're too focused on the negative and we need to switch it around and kind of be more focused on the positive. Thank you. Thank you for your time and all of your knowledge. It's been so wonderful to meet you and to have this chat with you.
It's been my pleasure, Cindy. Thank you so much. And to all your listeners, please be well.
Let me know here, tell the listeners where they can find you.
Sure. So my name again is Dr. Sean McCloy. I am the Medical Director of Integrative Health Center of Maine. Our website is maineintegrative.com.
Perfect. That sounds great. Everybody who has been listening, I thank you for listening, and I hope you've enjoyed this and gotten some nice tidbits out of this wonderful chit chat. And come back, listen again. For all my listeners, I hope you stay well and stay safe. Thank you, everybody.